My name is Musa Adnan, that's Dr Uthman Lateef, this is ReRooted, and here's what we have coming up for you today. I actually really want to ask you about a specific parallel, if we can bring some parallels into this discussion. Are there examples from history, and I'm sure there are, where this otherization, or this otherizing rather, happened with other people?
The Holocaust is always kind of talked about. The Germans didn't simply develop these sentiments of hatred against people that they were living with, but there was a process of propaganda against those people in the media. Commentators, politicians are saying things that are undermining their sense of humanness.
Okay.
Now, when that happens, that means I'm going to start questioning: is it true? Are you really like me? Like, are you as human as me? You know, Barry Sanders, he argues in his book about the same thing about the gangsters. He says, so what would happen if you took one of these gangsters and locked him in a room and you gave him an autobiography to read? He said, number one, they don't read because they just like smoke drugs and watch TV and they don't buy books. Yeah, that's a problem. But he says, what happened if you did give him a book to read of somebody else's life? You know what he says? He says it would blow up his existence. So he uses words like that because he says that it would completely make him re-question everything he's ever believed.
So, brothers and sisters, along the course of the past week, some events have taken place and unfolded that have left many of us shocked, scarred, physically affected, mentally affected, emotionally affected. When I actually woke up that morning, on Friday, the 15th of March, I actually checked my phone. It's one of the first things I do. And I was surprised to find out what had happened in New Zealand. It was shocking. I had received videos. I had received pictures. I was extremely disturbed. I had some very important work to get done that day. And I actually find it difficult to get on with my work because of the kind of effect that this had on me. It was very surprising. A 28-year-old gunman stormed into a masjid in New Zealand, in Christchurch to be specific, and slaughtered 50 people. And aside from those 50 people, there are still people in critical condition, in intensive care, and people that have been heavily affected in their lives, and families as a result of this action have been inflicted with immense pain and grief. He live streamed the act as he done it, showing no empathy, no remorse, trying to monumentalize the things that he's doing. He had a history of these sort of thoughts going on in his mind. He had clearly been victim of a sort of narrative that has been promoted, a narrative that's affected many people. Many people, brothers and sisters, from the victims vary in their background. People who are teachers, engineers, a university professor, a religious figure, women, children. One of the women that I actually read about, she went to the brother's side of the masjid, the male side of the masjid, to find out what had happened to her husband, and as a result of her actually going there, she ended up getting killed herself, and her husband survived. The kind of things that we are talking about, people from the dead ranging in their ages from 3 to 77 years old, children, women, men. This was a catastrophe in the 21st century that we cannot forget. To discuss this huge issue that has taken place and something that is going to last for a number of years now, we have invited none other than Dr Uthman Lateef. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Uthman.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
Jazakallahu khairan for coming down and speaking to us about this. I think you are definitely the best person possibly, you know, in the world from the Muslim side and the Muslim sphere to speak to us about these things. Because of your credentials, subhanAllah, you know, for all of the brothers and sisters that may not know, Dr. Uthman actually has a bachelor's in history. He went on to pursue his master's in Crusader studies. He done his PhD in Muslim effort to recapture Jerusalem during the Crusades, and he's also done his postdoctorate work on the place of empathy in challenging frames of otherness in conflict. So, Dr. Uthman, your credentials speak for themselves in the sense that you focus very much, and you know we've been in events together, and you focus many of your talks on the topic of empathy, humanization, trying to understand human beings in this realm that we live in, where there's atrocities taking place on a daily basis. There's mass murders like this one that we've witnessed. How do we understand this concept of someone walking into a place of worship? I mean, how do we fathom this as Muslims? A person picks up a gun, they walk into a place of worship, they butcher 50 people as if they're playing some sort of video game. There's no empathy shown. They are referred to as, hello brother, welcome to the mosque. And their response to that is bullets. How do we understand this?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. May Allah bless you, Brother Musa. To begin with, I'm not the best in anything. I don't see myself in the best in anything. So amazing commentators and authors who have spoken a good deal about this topic, and may Allah make whatever I say have some benefit, inshallah. Let us begin by talking about how Allah describes this in the Quran, this phenomenon of man and his digressing from whatever is innately good in him. Allah in the Quran, He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Allah says, consider man and his self, consider the nafs, how it's formed and shaped. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. And how that nafs is inspired to really descend into depravity, but also be upright and God conscious. So every human being, therefore, can have both of those trends of being malicious and cruel, but also being very kind and compassionate. One of our prayers that we're taught to read is Allahumma alhimni rushdi wa qini sharra nafsi. Oh Allah, our Prophet would say, oh Allah, inspire me with correct guidance and save me from the evil of myself. And the same way that they juxtapose in the verse in the Quran about fujuraha wa taqwaha, that juxtaposition is also in the dua that we read, because either you could be inspired by good or you're failing in your own self. Now, one of man's most depraved really digressions away from his innate humanity and fitrah is when he sees in others something that he can't already see in himself. So when you're speaking about, for example, the person, he's firing bullets at people that they're saying, welcome brother, come to the masjid, we question, what is it that he's actually seeing? What is it he's seeing? There's a good book called A is for Ox by Barry Sanders. He speaks, in fact, about mass shootings in LA in the 1990s, gangsters who would carry weapons and they would shoot people like dead in restaurants and places like they're making these hits against other gangsters. And what he looks at the kind of weapon they're using. The most famous weapon, most popular, was called the MK Ultra something. It was a weapon with a very large barrel. And this weapon, it defies accuracy. So if the gangster's using the weapon, is not intending to make an accurate hit on the target, but to create destruction around him. And he says, well, remember the kind of world that the gangsters are living in, because they're living in a world of entertainment and spectacle creating and games and computer games. And he has like transcripts of interviews when these gangsters are caught, and they never use words like die, death, kill. They use words like obliterate, terminate, annihilate, And so the whole purpose was to create a scene of mass suffering. But what he says is that, are they seeing a human at the end of the barrel? Because we recognize one another. It's called human frames of recognizability. You, Musa, have wept tears once in your life. I have also. So if I see you weeping tears, I could connect. Well, I've also felt the same feeling you're feeling. You've smiled and laughed. I've also. We connect to one another based on these human codes of recognizability or familiarity. And that really makes us essentially human. That's the human connection we have with one another. But these things are easily subverted. It's very easy also to subvert these things. So remember, that's what dehumanization is. It is to subvert what is inherently fitra based, what is inherently good in a person. So now to do that can be difficult and also easy. It can be difficult because we recognize these traits in each other so easily. It's like we have mimicry, like a baby. If a baby cries, then the other baby next to it will cry, not knowing why it's crying, doesn't feel any pain, but it's crying still. This is where we get mimicry from. Yeah. And that's the discourse in empathy studies. And so we are therefore, we feel, we're not, Allah hasn't made us, we're not essentially and naturally cruel or vindictive or evil. Therefore, it is quite hard to dehumanize somebody because we're stripping off layers of our own self that we're supposed to see in others. But it's also easy. How is it easy to dehumanize somebody else? If you think about like the way that this played out in conflicts around the world that are current to us today and also in the past, the Holocaust is always kind of talked about, and it should be because it was a great suffering of a lot of people. It didn't just begin in isolation. The Germans didn't simply develop these sentiments of hatred against a people that they were living with, you know, they knew from school, like they used to the butcher down the road. But there was a process of propaganda against those people in the media. Commentators, politicians are saying things that are undermining their sense of humanness.
Okay.
Now, when that happens, that means I'm going to start questioning: is it true? Are you really like me? Like, are you as human as me? Maybe you're human. You're not as human as I am a human. And it's like you have the ascent of man. In fact, they did a study in America about, they showed people that the ascent of man, the picture of people, like, you know, from when he's the Neanderthals, you know, man, and he's the caveman, then he's hunchback, you know, and then you have the man of the modern man. And they asked them to try and specify a people or a race of people or a religious people, a group of people, try and give each of these people the picture from a different time period from in their minds of evolution, a name. And so the Muslims, they were not near the upright man. They were more like the Neanderthals, you know, like the caveman who's stooping. They didn't see in Muslims a full sense of humanity. So you might see you're human, but are you fully human? It's like Jekyll and Hyde. They called him, I think it was Utterson said he's something troglodytic. And troglodytic is like, who knows what that is? It just sounds inhuman. It sounds something bestial. It sounds like, what is the name of a medicine? What is it? It's something else. Yeah. So not fully human. And so the Jews, for example, in the Holocaust were given like caricatures of being untrustworthy and barbaric and savage and not merciful, not kind, you know. And then this begins to develop, you know, as dehumanization takes place. And so
it seems like the first thing that happens, because in order for us to understand the atrocity at hand and what's taken place, we really need to understand the process that it took for someone to do that.
Oh, yes.
What's going on in this person's mind? Are there other people that think like that? If there are, many of us are at threat. We all go to the masjid, we all go to the mosque, we all pray, we all do these things. And these mosque goers, what had they done? We have people like Dawood Nadi, who was 71 years old, an old man. He's, you know, we see old men like that in the masajid, in the mosques over here where we live in London.
Yeah.
And we see people all over the place like that. All they're doing is, their purpose is to come to the mosque and pray. So what was this person thinking? It seems like from what you said, Dr. Uthman, that the focus here initially is this otherizing. So initially what happens is these people become otherized, and that leads to dehumanization. Is that the right way to look at this?
That's very true, very true. So there's a few things. One is that you see in the case of the Muslims of New Zealand, Australia, America, Europe, there's oftentimes a sustained campaign of kind of fair engendering about those Muslims. So Muslim a woman wearing hijab or wearing a burqa, or a man with a beard. Sometimes we find images like these used in the media with a very skewed narrative. You know, is it like they have ill intent, ill purpose, immigrants, invaders, you know, untrustworthy, all these kind of things. Now, if this is systematic and it's going on for a long time, that's going to affect the way people think about Muslims or other people. One of my chapters in the book I'm writing now is about America and Arab suffering. Yeah. So I look at, for example, Iraq. Let's take Iraq as an example. Iraqis have suffered in the war in Iraq a lot, and I question: is it really possible for, let's say, the average American to have empathy for those Iraqis in their suffering? Maybe not. And I argue because if there's been Iraqi Arab or Arabs shown in American media as terrorists, and this is for decades, you know, terrorist, untrustworthy, cruel, you know, like you know, all the negative stereotypes you could think have been imputed on Arabs, and this has gone on for a very long time. Then for them to show empathy for those people, they have to unpeel layers and layers and layers of stereotyping before they get to the human being in the frame. And then they can think about, well, maybe he looks a bit like me now. And I think that's what's happening. And so the man who's committed these horrendous acts of murder in the masjid, what is he being fed of all these lies and propaganda about who these Muslims are? Because what's going to happen, like you mentioned, the old man, Allah have mercy on his soul, who died in the masjid, and the old sister, Allah have mercy on all of their souls, and he's not discriminating. It's a complete annihilation. Now what happens? This is what happens. We all have a mental canvas. We have a mental canvas. And we're painting on our mental canvas, but it's about how we're painting. How does the media paint our image? Yeah. You mentioned the name of one of the victims. And that's interesting because he has a name. Sometimes we're nameless and we're faceless. We're just a lurking shadow in the dark. If you're painting on the mental canvas with broad strokes using wide brushes, that means that there is no room for identification, for an outline that's neat. You know, you're paying attention to the nuances and the shades of color. No, it's just one blackness. And that's like, so if he's shooting people in a mosque and he's not discriminating, if it's a child, whatever, it's because it's all one and the same picture of a threat. He thinks in his mind of invaders into New Zealand, of terrorists into New Zealand, of people who are, you know, anti the world, humanity. And I think that this is what we're dealing with.
It's amazing because one of the things you just mentioned, how these paintbrushes are being, you know, stroked just on these papers, and these wide strokes are being made regarding a kid that wanted to grow up and play football.
That's right.
A man who was a husband to his wife, a man who was a university lecturer who was lecturing other students and actually giving something to the wider society, giving his knowledge, his information that he studied for to wider society. As soon as these sort of things are mentioned, all of a sudden everything falls into place and you feel this sense of empathy because you relate.
Yeah, and these are what human codes of familiarity are. They're not to make a presumption about a people. You know, Barry Sanders, he argues in his book about the same thing about the gangsters. He says, so what would happen if you took one of these gangsters and locked him in a room and you gave him an autobiography to read? He said, number one, they don't read because they just like smoke drugs and watch TV and they don't buy books. Yeah, that's a problem. But he says, what happened if you did give him a book to read of somebody else's life? You know what he says? He says it would blow up his existence. So he uses words like that because he says that it would completely make him re-question everything he's ever believed, because he will realize, I'm pointing my gun at somebody who has a mother, like I have a mother. and whose mother would cry for him like my mother would cry for me. And all of these things are like what makes us naturally human. And I think, like you mentioned, the importance of the narrative is very key in rehumanizing or creating empathy in a people who are stripped of that in the beginning.
Dr. Uthman, in order for us to understand this tragic event that has taken place, where many of our brothers and sisters have been killed, I actually really want to ask you about a specific parallel. If we can bring some parallels into this discussion, are there examples from history, and I'm sure there are, where this otherization, or this otherizing rather, happened with other people? So this happened with people from the past, and it resulted in the same thing.
Well, I think the first thing we should speak about is the Maori community of New Zealand. Remember that they also have been a process of a long process of otherizing because of colonialism. And they're living in New Zealand right now. So I think that we also have to see them in the frame of an othered people because of darker skinned, because of so-called not having the same set of values and ideals as the colonizers who came into New Zealand. And that's the first thing. The second thing, there are many examples that we can speak about. Let's say, take Rwanda. Yeah. In Rwanda you had, and again it's colonialism, and it's interesting because this guy was a white supremacist, a far-right racist, who saw like the non-whites, in this case the Muslims, as representing a kind of an anti-whiteness, an anti-civilization about things, And so if you think about Rwanda, now Rwanda you had three tribes. You had the Hutus and the Tutsi, and you had the Twa, but you had Belgian colonizers, and they're whites. So the Rwandans are blacks, the Hutus and Tutsis are both blacks, but there's small differences between them. One group is lighter skinned. The Hutus are darker skinned, the Tutsis are lighter skinned, and the colonizers therefore favored the lighter skinned ones, and they gave them better jobs, better homes, better, living spaces. And so when the president's plane was shot down in April 1994, they just turned. And so then the darker skinned one, in this case the Hutus, turned against the lighter skinned one because of all of the years of what they believed to be abuse. Wow. And it was a slaughter. I mean, a slaughter in 100 days, up to 1 million people were killed. And this is now, we speak about, Dave Grossman in his book his book is called On Killing, and he speaks about the way altitude connects to attitude. So if you're killing from afar, then you feel less, because you're not seeing your victims, you're not seeing the blood or anything. But if you're killing from up close, means you've really dehumanized your victims, because you're seeing people pleading, and there's phases you're going through. So in the beginning, like for example, the man at the beginning of the masjid, Allahu Akbar, may Allah accept them as martyrs, because Allahu Akbar. And so he's trying to plead with the man, he's saying something, but he's so close. Now the murderer, he has to overcome, like I mentioned, what is inherently good in a person, he has to overcome it. He's subverting all that is natural from fitrah to dehumanize that person by shooting him anyway. And then secondly, he's going to see the blood on him. The blood, and maybe he's dying, but he's saying, please call for help or ambulance. He has to bypass that. You see, so at each stage he's bypassing, subverting what is supposed to be naturally good in him to dehumanize that person. In Rwanda, they're hacking to death so close, and these are like their neighbors and their school teachers and people that they're familiar with. But that's the process of dehumanization. They were calling them cockroaches, vermin. You know what happens in dehumanization is that everything that you see as evil within yourself, or wrong in yourself, or less than good in yourself, you impute on somebody else. That's the first step, okay? So if you take, let's say, the Jews in the Holocaust, they were untrustworthy or malicious or not really with the state, not really loyal to the state, And these are bad, but they're not the worst things, but they're bad things still, is how the Nazis are projecting them. Now, what happens when these are all depleted? You've gone through everything you can possibly go through, yeah? Like with the Muslims, sometimes in American media or elsewhere, Muslims are vile, vicious, they're backwards, uncivilized, Now, what happens when it's all depleted? We've gone through everything. Now you have animalistic tendencies. So they're not even fully human. they're like not even human. They're like act like animals. They're so barbaric. And so the Jews were called rats, you know, cockroaches. For the Rwandans, it was the same for the Tutsis, and the same for Muslims in Bosnia and elsewhere. So I think many history bears witness to many tragic encounters like that.
It's amazing because from hearing you speak, I think of modern examples of dehumanization in our society.
Oh yes.
If when you watch a movie, in the beginning of the movie, you see two people, they're getting along. Throughout the movie, there's this narrative about one of them. He's moving shady, he's a little bit shady, etc., etc.
Yeah.
He does some things, they show you him doing some things. By the end of the movie, when the first character has killed him, you're like, yeah, that's good. It's good he died. I'm so happy he died. Or if he doesn't die, you think he should have died. He should have been killed. That's how the movie should have ended. What have you done there? What was the whole process from the beginning to the end of the movie?
Yeah.
The process was they were trying to dehumanize this person in your eyes, so that when you walk out of that movie theater, you're like, yeah, it's good. I'm happy that.
Oh yeah. Now there's two main ways this gets done. One is through image projection, and the other is through narrative building. Okay. Now, let's say, for example, the example that you just given me about the two people who are good. It's very likely that to begin with, the one who is supposed to be not good will be shown in a very different light.
Yes.
Yeah, different light, okay? Like he won't have the hue, you know, he won't have the hue around him, you know? He'll be kind of the one who's kind of shown in the darkness. I have a chapter in my book, which I'm writing now, about an American charity called Americares, yeah? Now, Americares, they've recently had two frames of images. They have a recent one, which is much better, but the older one, which I looked at from 2014 or to 16, I think, had a tab called Medical Outreach in Gaza, okay? Now, these are victims, of course, and they're trying to raise money for them, but it's about the way that they showed the image of Gaza that would almost immediately dehumanize those people. Yeah, they othered people. So on the front page it had a boy, Gazan boy, you know, very tightly framed. He's looking like he's frowning. He has like dust on his face. He's looking down, and it's almost reminiscent of like a stone thrower in Gaza. Yeah, the one of the woman. This is even more tragic. It had a bed. A picture of a bed, a girl on the bed, and she had a teddy bear next to her, still in its packaging. Then he had another woman at the end of the bed wearing niqab and everything, all in black, and she's looking away from the child. Yeah. Now, what does it do? It kind of gives you the impression the woman is inattentive to her child, maybe doesn't care about the child, looking away from the child. And then you have the thing about, well, that's more the reason why the white American savior needs to go and help the poor girl, because her mother doesn't care too much about her. And that's the way that an image, if it's contorted and if it's skewed, or if it isn't framed in a way that is seeking to humanize people, is going to dehumanize them instead, you know. And then the other one is going to be the narrative, what is being said about people. And I think that both of these things work oftentimes together in very negative media representations of a people that will then eventually dehumanize them. But we have a role, I think, as human beings and as Muslims, to try and reverse that trend by giving people a frame of recognizability, a narrative of humanness, as opposed to being dehumanized and othered in the media.
Jazakallah khairan for that, Dr. Uthman. You know, because now we come to the part where we've understood what kind of build-up happened in the mind of this person for him to even commit such an atrocious act, for him to walk into a masjid and butcher people. He clearly had dehumanized them in his mind due to a false narrative, due to him being told certain things, due to him seeing Muslims in a certain light, people who have immigrated in a certain light. He clearly saw them like that, so he thought it's okay and it's good. Not even okay, it's good and it's encouraged for me to go and do this. Now, Dr. Uthman, how do we bring this humanization back into the picture? How do we humanize ourselves as Muslims in light of all of these things that are happening, in light of the media portraying us in a certain way, in light of far-right groups, people out there who are pushing this narrative that we are not humans, that is resulting in us being thought as like animals.
I wanted to think about blacks in America, okay? And think about black suffering. I think we learn a lot of lessons in black suffering. We should read the works of Frantz Fanon, you know, and W.E.B. Du Bois. Very, very enlightening, very thought-provoking. And I think they leave us with a lot of lessons to learn about our current age of dehumanization and othering, because they suffered the same thing. His book is called The Souls of Black Folk. In fact, in his first page, in his first paragraph, he writes, what does it mean to be a problem? Like we think, what does it mean to have a problem? He says, what does it mean to be a problem? How he saw himself, you know, as like, but one of the things that's interesting is this, you know, there were a lot of lynchings of hundreds of victims, of black victims, you know, in America. Now, you spoke about how we humanize ourselves. Remember that this criminal, murderer, terrorist in New Zealand did something else, in that he created a spectacle around the suffering, is that he filmed it. He did a live stream. And it's quite a new thing to live stream something. And as soon as that happened, I heard that it reminded me of Neil Postman in his book, Amusing Ourselves, that he says that the Homo sapien has become the Homo scenicus. The man of thinking becomes a man, the entertainer. And even him, in his vile, outrageous act of murder, is still the entertainer. He's still seeking to entertain his fans who would love the scene, because it's like bug splats. It was like bug splats on a computer game. So it is a shot, bug splats on a computer game. Yeah. They're not seeing any humanity. They're not seeing any humanness in that. Now, when black people would be taken for executions, or for lynchings, lynchings were not execution. They were not like, they were not criminal, you know, they were not breaking any laws for that. They were taken oftentimes in the name of saving white womanhood. It was seen as a way of protecting. We have to kill these blacks because they're a threat to whites. And so they have like, maybe they would rape white women, you know, maybe they're kind of sexually aggressive. This is the narrative building up about them. And so young girls are scared of black people. This is why when Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote her book, Uncle Tom, it was a way she tried to reverse the image of the black man. And this happened, by the way, during the debates about abolition and keeping slavery. But this interesting thing happened, by the way. This is important. You see, Harriet Beecher Stowe had a child. She had a miscarriage. She lost her child. And she's a white woman. And she says in her own words that at that moment in time, I had this reflection in myself, and I thought the same feeling of abandonment and loss I'm experiencing as a woman, as a mother, is what a black mother must feel at the slave auction, being separated from her child. Now that is an amazing reflection. She wrote the book which became the second best-selling book in the 19th century in America. Why? Because she wanted to try and humanize, although there's people, there's other problems with the book in the way that it projects the real black man, but in her own way she just sought to humanize as opposed to, you know, playing with the whole narrative of dehumanizing the black people. Now, as you were speaking, I was reminded of a poem, because you spoke about how can we seek to reverse the tide of dehumanization. Paul Laurence Dunbar was, and still is, I think, the most acclaimed black poet, African-American poet in African-American history. And he wrote a book called The Haunted Oak. And this poem, it has a true story behind it. I think he heard news from a farmer or a villager that there's an oak tree where a black person was hanged, and now it's become a haunted tree. In his poem, look what he says. Now, his poem is kind of in the voice of the tree is speaking. And the tree says, I feel the weight against my bark, and the weight of him in my grain. I feel in the throe of his final woe, a touch of my own last pain. You see what the oak tree is saying? The oak tree is saying, the crime is being committed on me, because the oak tree is a tree where the man was hanged. But he says, as the man was dying, I too was dying. As a man was feeling the pain, I too was feeling the pain.
Wow.
You know, and that's empathy.
That's humanizing.
That's humanizing, you see. Because remember that to humanize means to, number one, not to stereotype. Because if you stereotype, then we're back to the broad brush and the black and the And
Yes.
but to humanize means to individualize. You have to give people an individual identity. To dehumanize is this one mass of black mess or nothingness, and that's why they can't discriminate, because it's like you're all the same. Look at Allah in the Quran, what He says. Allah in the Quran says about the Jews and the Christians, laysu sawa'a, they're not all the same. Right? Laysu sawa'a, they're not all the same. Now, Sahaba, maybe they were thinking that, you know what, they're all just enemies, you know, but Allah is saying, laysu sawa'a, they're not all the same, you know. And make the distinction.
Yeah.
Allah in the Quran says that amongst them, if you gave them like a dinar, Allah says that they would keep that, and they would be honorable and they were trustworthy, and others are not trustworthy. But the point is, they're not all the same.
Yes.
And I think that that's how we have to see. Not every person is the same, and everybody, of course, is a. I'm reading this book right now. It's a very sad book. It's called Millie. Maybe you remember the murder of this young girl in England called Millie Dowler. Do you remember that young girl, Millie Dowler? Yeah, she was killed by this man called Levi Belfield. Okay. 3 young girls were murdered, one French, one her, and another one. This is a very big book. It's by her sister called Gemma Dowler, right? And she wrote this book about her sister. And you know why she wrote it? She explained, she says, I'm writing this book for my own daughter so that they could know their auntie. They could know their auntie. And it really touched me. I thought, and because because that man who murdered her dehumanized her, isn't it? Like she's just like a cockroach, an insect, like a bug splat. Nothing, just killed, and there's no life behind her. But the woman, her sister, was trying to imagine storying. Yeah. To imagine storying means that, like you're saying, the people, of course, the martyrs who died in the masjid, each one of whom had a story to tell. And there's a story of what they could have been.
Yes.
Yeah? Could have been. So, for example, Emily can become Millie. Susan Sontag or Judith Butler writes about Daniel, I think Daniel Pearl, his name was, a man who was abducted and beheaded by his captors in Pakistan in 2002, I think it was, or 1. But his name was Daniel, but in the video he becomes Danny Pearl, right? So can we do the same then? I argue in my book about a young girl who was executed, who was raped and murdered by American soldiers called Abir Qasim Hamza al-Janabi. That was her full name. Her mother's name was Fakhriya, father's name was Hamza, sister's name was Hadil. And I argue, well, can the Abir ever become the Abi? Can Abir ever become the Abi? because that takes a stretch.
Yes.
Can the same way that someone becomes a Millie or becomes Daniel to Danny, can the Abir become the Abi? Right? That means I have to personalize. Dehumanization is depersonalization. I'm depersonalizing. You have no personality. You're just one big mass of something. That's, and I've dehumanized you. But if I'm seeing individual frame in every single person, then it's something remarkable, you know. And I think this is important for us.
Subhanallah, some very, very insightful points there, Dr. Uthman. Subhanallah, that I think many of us can really benefit from and think about. I think it's sort of self-explanatory that in order to humanize, we need to first educate ourselves on empathy. We need to first understand and have a good sense of emotional intelligence when we're speaking to people. A good way to start that might be to, speaking to your family in better ways, treating your family and your friends and your foes in better ways. I feel personally, and the work that we do here at iERA, we all feel that one of the best ways to humanize people and to bring this, humanization and to bring this empathy back into the picture is by educating people and giving them da'wah.
Oh yes, of course. Allahu Akbar.
How important do you feel like these two things are? Namely, specifically da'wah. Giving da'wah, us projecting, we are Muslims, we believe that there is only one God that's worthy of worship. We believe in all of the prophets, and we believe in these messages from Allah, that the Quran has messages from Allah in it. Your creator that created you, who loves you, who looks at you as a human, who looks at you as someone that's going to make mistakes and turn back to him.
Oh, this is very, very beautiful what you're saying. It's very beautiful what you're saying. And it reminded me of, the Prophet ﷺ, his name is Muhammad ﷺ. But they would call him Mudhammam. Look at empathy. There was nobody who had more empathy than the Prophet ﷺ. Allah in the Quran said, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَءُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. The messengers come to you from yourself, and it troubles him what would happen to you. حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ, full of concern for you, and with the believers he is compassionate and merciful. Now his name was Muhammad ﷺ, but they would call him Mudhammam, which is the opposite of Muhammad, right? The one who is not praiseworthy. And he would then say to people, well, who is that? I mean, who is Mudhammam? And my name is Muhammad ﷺ. But still, in spite of this, in this situation, in this context, Allah is saying in the Quran, لَتَسْمَعُنَّ, you will hear from the mushrikeen and from others, أَذًا كَثِيرًا, many hurtful words, right? So even if we do our level best, does not mean that it would stop dehumanizing altogether, because you're still going to hear, you might hear bad things, because no one had the most perfect mannerism than our Prophet, but still they sought to do bad things to him. But I think we have an obligation to ourselves and our next generation also. Dawah is very, very essential in this respect, because remember that Allah in the Quran, when he's speaking to people, he's speaking with a sense of togetherness. For example, we spoke about the Rwandans, Hutus, Tutsis. Allah in the Quran says, وَمِنْ آيَاتٍ, from the signs of Allah, and Allah has made you, and خَلَقَكُمْ, Allah has made you into nations and tribes. Allah didn't say he made nations and tribes. He says he made you into nations and tribes. That means we recognize each other in that whole process of becoming nations and tribes. Yes. Like the verse on the marriage when Allah says, and خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُم, created for you from you, meaning your wife is just a part of you. You don't see her as an outsider or as an other person. And I think when we're calling others to Allah, your point was very beautiful in that you're calling people to a Lord who does not discriminate.
Yes.
Allah is fair and just with all people. And any differences people have, like let's say the example of one of the Prophet's companions was Julaybib,
yes,
radiallahu an. And Julaybib, in fact, he was kind of othered, slightly in his time, because people saw him as an other. They saw him as just an outsider, as a stranger, because he looked different to them, behaved different to them. But look at how our Prophet reversed the tide of potential otherizing of that human being, in that when he was martyred, the Prophet says, هَذَا مِنِّي وَأَنَا مِنْهُ, this man is from me and I am from him, 3 times, to show, well, he's not just like one of us, he's one of me and I'm one of him. And that just shows the importance of empathy. And also, there's 2 kinds of empathy. We have like cognitive empathy, we have affective empathy. Cognitive empathy means to understand the needs of others. When we're speaking to others about Allah, right, people have like all sorts of things happening in their lives. They have like domestic things we all experience as human beings, financial problems we all have problems with our children, all sorts of things that we have in life. But speaking to somebody about Allah means also to relate to their life experiences, to where they are in life. You see, there was a man, Ikrimah ibn Abi, look at the Prophet's empathy here. Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, he was the son of Abu Jahl. And he was one of those who fled from Mecca as the Prophet came back into Mecca. And he was scared in Allah. And he says, I've got to be sincere, came back, to embrace Islam. And the Prophet knew he was coming, sallallahu. And the Prophet says to his companions, يَأْتِكُمْ Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. Ikrimah, Abu Jahl's son, is coming to you, mu'minan muhajiran, as a believer and as a muhajir, as an immigrant. Now he's speaking to people who were muhajirin. They were muhajirin, right? They migrated, How does that make Abu Jahl's son a migrant? It does. Because migration isn't just migrating Mecca to Medina or Mecca to Abyssinia. He's migrating away from Allah back to Allah, right? He's migrating away from the Prophet back to the Prophet.
Wow.
Isn't that hijrah? Allah in the Quran says, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, flee back to Allah. And he's telling them he's coming to you as a believer and as a migrant. And they're thinking, we are the muhajirin, but Allah's called us muhajirin in the Quran. He's also muhajir. And then he says, فَلَا تَسُبُّوا أَبَاهُ, and don't curse his father. فَإِنَّ السَّبْ يُؤْذِيَ الْحَيِّ وَلَا يَبْلُغَ الْمَيْتِ, because cursing harms the living and it doesn't harm the dead. And if you curse his father, it's gonna harm him, because you have to feel. They say empathy is like putting yourself in someone else's shoes. That's true, but also to realize we don't all wear the same size shoes. There are codes and modes of differences between us, we have to appreciate that everybody is different. And so when we speak to others about Allah, Islam, it is to remember, therefore, that that person is a sequence of life experiences. I'll give you one example. A woman came. In the hadith it says, كَانَ فِي أَقْلِيَا شَيْءٌ. This woman, she had a mental illness from the Sahabiyat, you know. And she came in Medina and she says, Ya Rasulullah, inna li ilayka hajj. I have a need I'd like you to fulfill for me. Now what did the Prophet say? You know the first thing he says to her? He says to her, Ya fulan, oh the mother of so and so. Right? Now just stop for a moment and just think what he's saying there. By saying, oh the mother of so and so, he's already affording that woman a place of importance. Right? He's already saying you've already achieved a lot in your life. There are those who are dependent on you because you're their mother. You're already a person of importance and significance in life. And then he says, look to see where you want me to stand with you so I could fulfill your need for you. I mean, giving her the power of choice. And I think therefore when we're approaching others, it is never to make presumptions about this person. That person is one person, not part of a mass. That they're not all the same in that respect. Abu Talib isn't like Abu Jahl. Mut'im ibn Adi isn't like Abu Jahl. You know, each one was different. Even amongst the disbelievers, there's differences. And I think we have to really respect that.
You know, just while you were speaking, a thought just pressed into my mind. And it's, if the New Zealand shooter knew all of this, he would never have done what he done.
Well, I think we have an obligation I'm also now, I think, to call people to Allah, you know.
Yes.
And I think there's amazing things, stories I'm hearing about, but there's a woman embraced Islam in Leeds. Maybe you heard the story yesterday.
I didn't.
Yeah. So she went with sweets. In one of the masjids in Beeston Road, masjid in Leeds, she went with sweets.
Yeah.
To take as a kind of, and this also shows a great sense of outreach in other people. We have to pay respect to that, you know. I think
definitely.
That's very profound, and it really is an act of mercy and kindness. And she went with sweet, but the mosque was empty, and so she went around and she found a room, and she opened the door, and there was a group of brothers sitting on the floor having like snacks and tea, and she came in with the sweet, and she said, I'm just here to give the sweet because of condolences, you know. And they said, okay, come and sit, and then we can have tea with us. And then she sat down and had tea, and she left the masjid as a Muslim. You know, this is why Allah in the Quran says, Wallahu ghalibun ala amrihi, walakin akthara an-nas la ya'lamun. Allah is in full control over his affairs, but people don't know. And I think, therefore, having that sense of outreach with mercy, with compassion, with kindness, with understanding and empathy, it goes a very far way. And that would really transform people's lives. Wow. And bring them closer to Islam, inshallah, you know.
Wow. You know, subhanallah. I mean, Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Uthman, you know, for taking time out of your busy schedule, you know, to impart us with this important information, this important knowledge. And brothers and sisters, I think it speaks for itself. Everything we've spoken about, otherizing, dehumanization, and ending with a message of hope, that there is hope at the end of the tunnel. Da'wah is here. We can give da'wah. We can call people to Islam. We can stop this dehumanization and this otherizing by educating people about what we are, who we are. Hey, I'm a human being, just like you.
You know, sorry to cut you off. I didn't want to miss this. So I had one of the brothers who died, who's now being hailed as a hero because he saved the lives of so many others. And he died, and also his son died. There was an interview that the news reporter made with that man's wife. I don't know if you saw that one. And she spent time with the wife, you know, who lost her son and lost her husband. Yeah. And she said to her, you know, like, how do you cope? Like, she said, what kind of man was your husband? And she said he was love, you know. And the woman broke down in tears, you know. She said he was love. And because of Islam, he acted out of love, you know. And it was really profound that they could understand, is that who you are? You're Muslim? Is that how you act? Is that what you do? And I think that's so profound for us to generate that message of that we're not, you know, it isn't about where you don't want cruelty, you don't want suffering, you don't want harm unto others, but you want goodness and kindness and peace in the lives of others. And I think that's very important. Remember that people, when they dehumanize, they're fulfilling their own self-ego, and in doing that, they have to efface you. the Nazis had these two terms of the Untermenschen, Übermenschen. The Übermenschen were the lower group, but to have an undergroup, you have to have, therefore, an upper group, which was the Nazis. And so the more, therefore, that they bring somebody down, dehumanize them, they have to herald themselves as champions of liberty and saviors of civilization, everything else, you know. But I think that in dawah, what it does is that it humbles people. It humbles people. People become Muslim and they realize their true place in life, you know. So I think that's important for us.
Allahu Akbar. Jazakallah khair, Dr.
Thank you so much. Jazakallah
for
khair.
taking your time out.
Allah bless you.
So much. May Allah bless you too.
May Allah bless you too.
You know, may Allah bless everything that you're doing and make your affairs easy for you and allow you to keep benefiting many people, inshallah. Ameen. Brothers and sisters, this is the conclusion of a very important episode of ReRooted, one that had to be done. You know, understanding, trying to fathom what happened in New Zealand is an important task for all of us, and we should all take it as a lesson. We shouldn't let these bad things happen and we cry over them and, you know, and that's it. We just leave it at that. We need to take these things as lessons and think of how we can change the future of humanity through these lessons, inshallah. Once again, Jazakallahu khairan, Sheikh Uthman, Dr. Uthman. And also, brothers and sisters, if you'd like to see more of Dr. Uthman, or rather read more of him, you could get his book. It's called The Cutting Edge of the Poet's Sword, Muslim Poetic Responses to the Crusades. That's already out. It's an already published book. You could find out more about what he does, inshallah, online. And other than that, brothers and sisters, this has been us from ReRooted. If you haven't subscribed to us already, please do hit the subscribe button down below to keep up to date with all of our upcoming videos. If you want to learn more about Dawah and what we do at iERA, all of our details will be in the description box below. Other than that, we'll see you on our next episode of ReRooted. Take care of yourselves. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.